1890 to 1919. From 1890 to 1919, most bantamweight boxing took place in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. Fighters often boxed every 2 to 3 weeks, and champions were expected to remain active or risk being replaced by another contender. Jimmy Berry anchored the earliest years of this period. He claimed the Bantamweight Championship in the 1890s, unified recognition by defeating Walter Crute in 1897, and retired undefeated in 1899 after a string of draws and no-decision bouts. As the new century opened, Berry was already out of the picture, and a new crop of fighters were fighting for recognition, setting the stage for Johnny Coulan's rise as world bantamweight champion in 1910. A decisive shift came in 1914, when Baltimore's Kid Williams stopped Coulan in Vernon, California, in a bout widely reported as a world title fight. Williams was a relentless pressure fighter who defended the championship frequently, but controversies over fouls and newspaper decisions created overlapping claims from rivals in different states. Pete Herman, a New Orleans bantamweight, worked his way through top opposition during this period and first fought Kid Williams in a non-title bout at home. In January 1917, Herman outpointed Williams over 20 rounds in New Orleans to lift the Bantamweight Championship, becoming the era's most widely accepted champion heading into the final years of the decade. World War I complicated the landscape. Many boxers traveled less or left the sport entirely, and several, including Kid Williams, spent time in military service. 1920 to 1928. Between 1920 and 1928, Pete Herman's bantamweight championship reign continued from the war years, but the title quickly changed hands amid competing claims between the New York State Athletic Commission and the National Boxing Association. Herman frequently defended across the southern United States, but New York sanctioning increasingly dictated the official lineal champion. Joe Lynch dethroned Herman on December 22, 1920, at Madison Square Garden in a 15-round decision that the New York Commission recognized as for the world title. Lynch reclaimed the championship decisively after earlier non-title meetings and was publicly declared the recognized champion. Lynch's reign included defenses against contenders like Memphis Pal Moore and Midget Smith, but hand injuries and weight issues caused occasional postponements. In 1922, he lost the title to Johnny Buff in a 15-round decision at Madison Square Garden, with Buff scoring a knockdown in the early rounds. Buff's championship lasted less than a year. In 1923, Frankie Gennaro, a former flyweight champion who had struggled to make the lower weight, challenged and outpointed Buff in a title bout. Frankie then lost decisions to contenders like Charlie Phil Rosenberg, and no single fighter held undisputed recognition. Panama Al Brown began rising late in the decade, defeating top opposition in Europe and the U.S. 1929 to 1935. From 1929 to 1935, Panama Al Brown dominated the bantamweight division with an extended reign as the first Latin American world champion and one of its most nomadic title holders. Brown captured the vacant New York State Athletic Commission and lineal bantamweight titles in June 1929 by defeating Gregorio Vidal at Queensboro Stadium in Long Island. He quickly added the NBA title by disqualifying Johnny Erickson in 1930 and unified further by outpointing Eugene Huot later that year, cementing recognition across major U.S. commissions. Brown defended across the United States and Europe, becoming a regular headliner in France and Spain under varying local rules. In Paris, he formed a close association with writer Jean Cocteau, who financed training camps and promoted exhibitions as social events. Brown's flamboyant lifestyle drew attention. He missed weigh-ins and disappeared between bouts, yet still racked up defenses in Montreal, London, and Milan. In 1929, Brown lost a 10-round decision to lightweight Al Singer at Madison Square Garden, but the contract excluded title stakes, so his championship remained intact. In June 1935, Brown lost his titles to Baltazar Sangchili by 15-round decision in Valencia, Spain, following a non-title loss to the Spaniard months earlier. Brown attempted a comeback, regaining the vacant IBU title over Sangchili in Paris in 1938, but by then, the NBA and NYSAC lines had moved to Puerto Rico's Sixto Escobar. Brown never fully regained world recognition at 118 pounds, having defended on 3 continents during his peak years, 1936 to 1949. By 1936, Puerto Rico's Sixto Escobar had emerged as a world bantamweight champion after defeating Pete Sandstole in Montreal to claim the NBA version of the title. Escobar turned professional at age 15 and was known for year-round training and abstaining from alcohol, habits that set him apart. He defended successfully in New York and Puerto Rico, but struggled with full unification. In 1938, Escobar lost his NBA title to Harry Jeffra by 15-round decision at Madison Square Garden in a nationally broadcast bout. Newspapers split on the close rounds, publishing scorecards the next day. But Jeffra took the verdict in most recognition. Jeffra's reign ended when he enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1941 amid World War II. With no defenses and no return scheduled, commissions vacated the title, creating a tournament. Manuel Ortiz won the California version in 1942 by outpointing Luis Salica and gradually unified recognition with NBA sanctioning. Wartime travel restrictions kept Ortiz's defenses mostly on the West Coast, where he fought challengers like Nacho Beristain and Jackie Patterson repeatedly with short turnarounds. He trained obsessively, with long runs and extended sparring, maintaining activity despite hand injuries that caused cancellations. In 1947, Ortiz lost the title to Harold Dade at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. Dade, a former Marine, won a close decision and became champion immediately after discharge. Ortiz regained the belt 2 months later in a rematch at the same venue. Ortiz's later defenses included a split with Carlos Chavez, who briefly held featherweight aspirations. By 1949, accumulating hand damage from cortisone treatments and 19 total title fights slowed Ortiz, but his record of defenses remains unmatched in bantamweight history. 1950 to 1959. Manuel Ortiz held the bantamweight title into the early 1950s before a new generation of international champions took over from Mexico, Australia, and Europe. Ortiz remained champion until 1950, when he lost the NBA title to Mexico's Lauro Salas by split decision in Los Angeles. Salas, a part-time barber who trained at night, demanded flat guarantees over percentages and defended regionally while negotiating unification. In 1952, Australia's Jimmy Carruthers dethroned Salas by 15-round decision at the Olympic Auditorium, becoming the country's first bantamweight world champion. Carruthers trained in isolation with few local sparring partners and made one U.S. defense before returning home triumphant. The title returned to Mexico in 1955 when Raul Raton Macias stopped Chamrun Songkhitrat in the 11th for the vacant NBA belt at San Francisco's Cow Palace. Macias became a national sensation, drawing military escorts after fan riots followed his defenses. Macias lost his undisputed status in 1957 to Alphonse Halimi by unanimous decision at Los Angeles' Wrigley Field, unifying the NBA and other lines despite Macias's early aggression. The French-Algerian Halimi defended across Europe and North Africa under varying rules. In 1959, Halimi dropped the title to Italy's Mario Diagata by 15-round decision in Bangkok. Diagata, who was deaf and used written instructions with trainers, became one of boxing's first hearing-impaired world champions before losing the belt back to Halimi months later. 1960 to 1975. The 1960s and early 1970s brought Mexican dominance to the bantamweight division, highlighted by explosive knockouts and rapid title changes among stars like Eder Joffre, Fighting Harada, and Ruben Olivares. Brazil's Eder Joffre unified the division in 1962 by knocking out Pone Kingpech in Bangkok, then defended with brutal stoppages of Harada and others before health issues forced retirement. Japan's Masahiko Fighting Harada won the vacant title in 1965 and held it until Lionel Rose, Australia's first Indigenous world champion, outpointed him in Tokyo in 1968 amid massive celebrations down under. Ruben Olivares, Mexico's most popular fighter, captured the undisputed championship from Rose on August 22, 1969, at the Forum in Inglewood with a fifth-round knockout. Raised in poverty, Olivares fought with ferocious body punching, but took extended breaks between bouts, sometimes linked to personal troubles, including alcohol. Olivares lost the title later in 1969 to Chucho Castillo in Los Angeles after 3 knockdowns following a short training camp. He regained it by 4th-round stoppage in December, then defended aggressively before vacating in 1972 due to weight issues. Carlos Zarate inherited the WBC belt and built a 55-fight knockout streak through the rankings. In 1976, he stopped Alberto Morales for the title, then defended with ferocity. Zarate and WBA champion Alfonso Zamora met in 1977 at Super Bantamweight. Both hit the canvas before Zarate's 4th-round knockout settled the Battle of the Z-Boys. 1976 to 1999. The late 1970s through 1990s saw bantamweight titles fragment across sanctioning bodies as action shifted overseas to Mexico, Japan, South Korea, and Thailand, while U.S. television interest waned. Lupe Pintor claimed the WBC title in 1978 by outpointing Carlos Zarate in Mexico City, then defended against international challengers like Johnny Owen and Alberto Davila. The WBA crown cycled through Thai and Mexican hands, with Kaosai Galaxy holding it for 19 defenses from 1984. The IBF introduced its bantamweight belt in 1984, won by South Korea's Bong Joon Kim. Orlando Canizales from Texas captured the IBF title in 1988 and made a division record 16 defenses over 6 years, beating contenders like Kelvin Seabrooks and Mauricio Pastrana. Japan emerged as a hotbed, with WBC champions like Payao Pultarat and Jiro Watanabe, though Watanabe's defenses were primarily at super flyweight before bantam bouts. Champions often avoided unification due to promoter contracts and TV deals. A 1991 Kim-Canizales clash fell through over broadcast conflicts. Canizales lost the IBF belt in 1994 to Jose Luis Bueno, but reclaimed versions later. Jeff Fennick, Australia's 3-division star, challenged for WBC unification in 1991, but was stopped by Azuma Nelson at featherweight. The era closed with alphabet belts spread across Asia and the Americas, setting up the 4-belt chaos of the 2000s. 2000 to 2018. The 2000s and 2010s fragmented the bantamweight division into 4 separate major belts that rarely unified, with champions defending regionally across Mexico, Panama, the Philippines, and the UK. Vic Darchinyan, an Armenian-Australian southpaw, held the IBF flyweight title before moving up. In 2007, Nonito Donaire knocked him out in the 5th at flyweight, fracturing his orbital bone and earning Knockout of the Year honors. Donaire later became a bantamweight star, unifying belts multiple times. Fernando Montiel, a Mexican veteran, held WBC and WBA bantamweight titles into 2011, defending frequently on short notice. Donaire stopped him in the 2nd round that February at bantamweight for the WBC/WBO crowns, ending Montiel's run. Anselmo Moreno of Panama controlled the WBA regular bantamweight title from 2008, defending mostly in Panama and Germany. His 2012 clash with Abner Mares at super bantamweight ended controversially via repeated low blows. Joseph Agbeko and Yanni Perez delivered a brutal rivalry for the IBF belt. Their 2010 Las Vegas war featured disputed knockdown counts. Agbeko's protest failed, but a rematch order was later scrapped. By 2018, fragmentation peaked. WBC with Luis Neri, Mexico, WBA Super with Ryan Burnett, Northern Ireland, IBF with Emmanuel Rodriguez, Puerto Rico, and WBO with Zolani Tete, South Africa. No unifications materialized amid contractual standoffs. 2019 to present. Naoya Inoue's arrival transformed the bantamweight division, bringing unification and undisputed status to Japan for the first time in decades. In May 2019, Inoue stopped IBF champion Emmanuel Rodriguez in the 2nd round of the World Boxing Super Series semifinals at Glasgow's SSE Hydro. Holding the WBA title, Inoue dropped Rodriguez 3 times with a left hook, unifying 2 belts at 119 of round 2. Later that year, Inoue faced Nonito Donaire in the WBSS final at Saitama Super Arena. Donaire fractured Inoue's orbital in round 2, but Inoue rallied for a 12th round knockdown and unanimous decision victory. Both required hospital treatment. The WBA postponed Inoue's mandatory until clearance. Pandemic restrictions in 2020 kept Inoue domestic until a 7th round stoppage of Jason Maloney in the Las Vegas MGM bubble. Negotiations stalled for WBC unification with Nordine Oubaali due to quarantines. In June 2021, Inoue added the WBC belt by stopping Oubaali in the 9th at Las Vegas's Virgin Hotels. Oubaali's corner waved the towel after repeated knockdowns. Inoue became the first undisputed bantamweight champion of the four-belt era on December 26, 2022, against WBO champion Paul Butler in Tokyo. Butler landed few clean shots over 11 rounds before Inoue's multiple knockdowns prompted a stoppage. Inoue vacated in early 2023 and moved up, stopping Stephen Fulton in July to unify super bantamweight belts. The bantam belts scattered. Jason Maloney won the vacant WBO, Takuma Inoue the WBA, Emmanuel Rodriguez reclaimed the IBF, and Junto Nakatani took the WBC.